This cartoon is called Metamorphosis, which, if you realize that both the insect and the frog both go through metamorphosis, puts a kind of another level of humor to it. I mean, it's also, what look like eyes become frog's eyes. Isn't it terrible when people explain jokes? Well, of course I did it in cold blood, you idiot. I'm a reptile. The idea of cold blood and warm blood is, the two terms are misleading. Things that are called warm-blooded, what they do is they generate heat so that their chemistry can always be kept at the same temperature, or roughly in the same temperature range. Whereas if you don't do that, you still have chemistry that has a particular good temperature range, but you have to kind of play in order to make sure that your body is in the range that fits that temperature. And in some cases, you'll have two sets of chemistry. This happens in reptiles a lot, where there'll be like a burrow or nighttime range, and you've got chemistry that works well there, and then there'll be a daytime warmed up range, and you'll have chemistry that works well there. So you have to kind of keep two sets of enzymes, it's really enzymes going. That's the downside of not being what's called homeothermic, not setting and keeping a temperature. Now, the next two groups beyond this, and probably the dinosaurs, all generate heat in order to hold a particular temperature at which their chemistry works really well. And that's the upside. The downside is you're burning off a lot of energy just to maintain that temperature. So your food requirements are higher, more calories, and your oxygen requirements to help mobilize those calories and heat are higher. In the lab, for instance, my lab tech and I come in and feed the animals all the time. And the animals that really need to be tended to, that need to be fed a lot, are the mice. You don't tend to think of mice as having high metabolisms, but compared to our lizards and our snake, who we could feed every couple of weeks and they'd be fine, we feed them more often than that. But my snake is shuts down over the winter for months and doesn't eat anything, doesn't even particularly lose weight doing that, because she's not terribly active during the winter and she's not generating her own heat and burning off calories that way. But the mice have to do that. They need to be fed much more regularly, and their oxygen requirements are higher, but that's not necessarily something that fits coming in. I'm not coming in and giving them oxygen. So the next group we're going to deal with are the reptiles. Here's the big deal. Reptiles have internal fertilization. The moisture, the wetness that the sperm swim through is fluid inside the female's reproductive system. So that kind of gets around the need to do the mating in water. But the other issue that the amphibians haven't overcome is that their eggs are, if they get into the air, they'll dry out. If you're going to reproduce on land, it would be nice if you could lay the eggs on land and they wouldn't dry out and die. And so the evolutionary development of what's called the amniote egg. There are some reptiles that let the embryos develop internally, and so they're protected. And this system probably developed that way and then became a breathable external system. No way to know for sure, because none of this stuff fossilizes. But this is what you have. You have an egg that is largely waterproof, so during the period that the embryo is developing in there, it doesn't dry out to death. But it's also, remember, oxygen needs wetness to get across. It also has the ability to breathe oxygen and release carbon dioxide during development without losing significant amounts of water. This is called the amnio egg, and it is the big development in reptiles that allowed them to become full-time land animals. So there's a yolk, there's developing embryo. Remember the early embryo in the chordates? This is a little bit more developed than that, but not all that much. There's the heart, here's your blood vessels. The blood goes out and around both the allantois, which is the breathing system. The amnion is the membrane that allows that, and the yolk where the nutrients are stored. And this is one of the reasons why the heart has to develop and start beating very, very, very early, because this circulation is critically important for the embryo to stay alive. This is after the notochord would have gone away. You've already got a spinal cord formed back here. You can see these little lines that shows that we are segmented animals. We do develop with a certain level of segmentation visible in an early embryo. This is the eye. This would all be head here. Nothing else there that needs to be addressed. So the reptiles. And this basic structure will stay the same in the next two groups as well, and was certainly the same in the dinosaurs. The amnio egg just freed up the animals to be land animals. Other things are connected to being land animals. I remember when I was a kid and first learning about how evolution works and learning about the progression of animal groups. And the fish are scaly, the amphibians are not scaly, the reptiles are scaly. It's like, what the heck's going on here? If that's the progression, why did the scales go away and then reappear? Did evolution go backwards? And the thing is, evolution goes the way that evolution needs to go. So there's no such thing as forwards or backwards. There's applying, and living under conditions. But it actually turns out that the fish scales and the reptile scales are different scales. The fish scales are generated from the underlayer of the skin, and the reptile scales are generated from the surface layer of the skin, which is why to grow, reptiles form these scales and they don't have a lot of stretchiness to them. And to grow, they often are discarding them. The fish discard, or the snake discards them as like one big sock. And our lizards just kind of just scrape bits and pieces off and replace them with new, bigger scales underneath. So it's not an exoskeleton, but there's a similar restriction on that. Oops. Gotta put this up here. When we fully process proteins, we break them down, we can actually use them for energy in our breathing systems. But when we do that, a part of the amino acid molecule comes out as ammonia. Ammonia is pretty reactive, it's pretty toxic. If you live in a bunch of water, you get rid of it really fast. That's why if you have a fish tank, you have to deal with the fact that, that ammonia gets into the water from the fish, and you either need a filter that will absorb the ammonia or an undergravel filter that will process the ammonia. When you do lay eggs in the water, they release the ammonia into the water. In nature, an aquarium's a pretty small, contained system. In nature, there's a lot more water movement, there's a lot more water, there's a lot more things that can process the ammonia out there. But once you get up on land, you have the sealed egg. it can't be cranking out ammonia. It's got to hang on to its wastes in a non-toxic form. And that non-toxic form is uric acid. And reptiles, even once they're hatched, continue to produce uric acid. In fact, pretty much all land animals that lay sealed eggs produce uric acid. And when I say all land animals, we're rolling back a bit. True for insects, true for spiders, true for ticks and mites that live on land, true for reptiles, true for birds, probably true for dinosaurs because we know at least some of them laid eggs. True for mammals, platypus and echidnas that lay eggs produce uric acid. I don't know that they do as adults though. But uric acid is kind of a dry whitish powder. When you get bird droppings on your car, you see these white, cakey spots. That's the uric acid. The other parts of the waste are digestive leftovers, because the waste come out the same opening as the end of the digestive system, the anal opening, and the waste removal system. Everything leaves through the same opening on birds and reptiles, and insects and spiders and stuff too. So uric acid is kind of almost a universal waste product for animals that lay eggs on land, so that they can build up waste through the embryonic development and not poison themselves. So it's a big deal. So here's the land vertebrates. You have a branch that goes off here, branch here that goes to here's your reptiles. During the early points, there's no real example here, but as reptiles were developing and mammals were developing, there were things that are on the reptile family tree that look kind of doggy, and things that are on the mammal family tree that look kind of lizardy. These got things that always come if you get a bag of ancient animals, dinosaurs and stuff for a kid. They always have that thing with the sail on its back, the Dimetrodon. That is actually more closely related to us than it is to the dinosaurs, than it is to the lizards that it looks like. You can look at inner structures in the bones and homologies and figure that out. You can see there were a number of dead ends here, the plesiosaurs and the ichthyosaurs, which are kind of the dolphin version of lizards. There really isn't any good equivalent for that. There are none of these still around. Remember about oxygen and how animals that became land animals but went back into the water never gained the ability to get by breathing water because not enough oxygen to support their higher metabolism? If these things were existing in a lake like Loch Ness, then not only would there wouldn't just be one of them, you'd need a whole population of them, or they would, the one would die and that'd be it. And they'd come to the surface to breathe. It wouldn't be that hard to spot them. And people made a whole industry out of whaling, where they went on a wide ocean and they didn't have that much trouble finding the whales. Why? Because the whales have to come to the surface to breathe. So these guys are not lake monsters. Most lake monsters are actually what they call soliton waves. If you get a very long, very narrow lake, the wind will occasionally push and make one big undulating wave go down the length of the thing, and from a distance it kind of looks like something swimming. And it isn't a boat wake. You go, oh, there's no boats to make it can't be a wave. Well, that's probably what it is. Sorry about that. Here you've got the dinosaurs, which now are connected to the birds. We'll talk about that later. And here's your reptiles, your turtles, your weird little thing that lives in New Zealand that there's only one species left of. Again, a wormy version, uneven, lizards, and another wormy version, and the crocodilians. The dinosaurs, based on some features of their skeletons, were classified for a very, very long time as reptiles. I firmly believe if there were regular old dinosaurs, not birds, but regular old dinosaurs surviving today, that their metabolism, their chemistry, a lot of stuff about them would be different enough that we would not classify them as reptiles. We would classify them as a separate group of vertebrates, the same way we do with the mammals and the birds. But when you're stuck with just the bones to look at, then it's a little tougher to do. It took a long time to connect the birds to the dinosaurs, even though the connection should have been fairly obvious. So what do we got? Groups. The turtles and tortoises. Turtles are primarily water reptiles. Tortoises are primarily land reptiles. Turtles are much more predatory because in the water they can catch things. Tortoises primarily plant eaters because there's not a heck of a lot they can catch and eat that could move, so they eat plants. Turtles are much more omnivores. They eat both plants and animals, but they're more predatory than the tortoises. They're very odd built. I just discovered, like, within the last month that my wife believed the old thing about that, like there's an animal inside the shell. There isn't. That shell is basically the scaly covering of the animal, and the skeleton is very much attached to the whole shell. There's no way to extract the turtle from inside the shell because it's all turtle. Their skulls are built differently from other reptiles. They have a beak instead of teeth, which showed up in some of the dinosaurs as well. They're an odd group. The crocodilians, big lizard-shaped water animals, not lizards, just superficially shaped like lizards, bigger heads, definitely predatory. Crocodiles, alligators, caimans, gharials. During the age of dinosaurs, these guys rivaled some of the dinosaurs in size. They get really, really big. Even now, is that, a saltwater crocodile at its maximum is, if I touched its nose to the wall over here, the tail would be out in the hall. And this is not a small room. Is that I think max length of a saltwater crocodile is somewhere around 30 feet recorded. Some Nile crocodiles have gotten up close to that length too. Big animals. But they've gone back into the water. Still breathe air, but are water animals. Lizards and snakes are considered to be a linked group. A lot of differences beyond the obvious. Lizards tend to have legs, snakes don't. But there are things called legless lizards to which you would look and go, well, why isn't that a snake? Well, there's other features that separate them. Lizards tend to have ear openings in their skull. Snakes don't. Snakes are descended from a long line of burrowers. Digging through the dirt, you got to protect a lot of stuff. Lizards have eyelids, their eyes open and close. Snakes have a clear scale contiguous with the rest of the scales on the head that covers the eye. They shed that when they shed their scales, but it doesn't give dirt anything to catch in. Snakes tend to since they don't have external ears, is that the way they process sound tends to be different from way, they tend to read the sound in contact with surfaces. But it's a snake, it's got a lot of contact with surfaces to pick up vibrations. You know, if you've ever listened, you know, to heavy bass and could feel it through your feet, is that there's a lot of sound vibrations that wind up in the surfaces around us that snakes can. So they sort of kind of hear, but it's a different kind of hearing than you would expect. And those are the subgroups. As I said, the dinosaurs are extinct. They used to be linked in with the reptiles. They still are to some extent, but they could just as easily be considered a totally separate group. So I'm not listing them here. I talked about them, but I'm not listing them.